Good morning, I'm Dr. Mike Thornton. I'm here today to talk about bruising in potatoes. When potatoes are bruised, a couple things happen. Weight loss in storage, and they become much more susceptible to disease problems in storage. So here I have a potato, and you can see the cracks and fissures on the outside of the potato. That is what we call shatter bruise. It's one of the most typical kinds. And as I peel it, you can see that underneath we have some discoloration. That black discoloration is what we call black spot. So the shatter bruises are apparent. You can see them on the outside of the potato. Black spot, a lot of times you can't see until you peel them. And this blackening takes about 24 hours after the potato has been injured to develop. So if you're going to really evaluate for black spot, you have to wait 24 hours after the potato's been handled to really see the damage. So a potato like this, if it went into the French fry factory, they would kick it out and maybe turn it into a coal or send it to the hash brown stream. If it's in the fresh pack industry, again, it would be kicked out and cold and have no or little value. So the question becomes, what can we, as people that handle potatoes, do about reducing bruise? Bruise is determined by the mass or weight of the potato and how far it falls. So if I take this big old potato here and I drop it onto a hard surface, that's enough to cause bruise injury. If I take a smaller potato and I drop it about the same height, not near as much damage. Probably still as bruised, but not near as bruised, and probably not as much shatter bruise. So what factors determine how much that bruise that occurs? Well, one of the number one things is the temperature of the potato. So we know that potatoes that are handled below 45 degrees are very susceptible to bruise damage. So what I've done is I've taken this potato here and I've taken it out of very cold conditions and I've dropped it. And here you can see the visible shatter bruise damage already on this end. And if I peel that away, you can see I have a shatter bruise on this side and a black spot bruise over here. So this big cold potato dropped onto a hard surface is very susceptible. If I take the same size potato, but now I warm it up into the recommended temperature range, which is between 45 and 65 degrees. That's where we want to be handling potatoes. Now I was able to drop it and there's no bruise on there. And that's all because of the pulp temperature difference. Cold potato dropped is going to bruise. A warm potato dropped the same amount is going to have little or no bruise. So I would recommend that everybody have one of these pocket thermometers. You just stick it into the potato and it'll tell you how cold they are, and then you know. Second principle has to do with how far we drop those potatoes. So if I take a potato, in this case I had this one here, I dropped it from 12 inches. You can hear and feel the amount of impact energy that goes into that. That is why we got so much bruise. If I take that same cold potato and now I reduce the drop to 6 inches, a lot less energy goes into that impact. And this potato, even though it's cold, doesn't have the shatter bruise and it's only got a little bit of black spot. So we've reduced the amount of damage and now we've changed it from shatter bruise to black spot bruise. So even though we don't like this bruise, it's less of a problem than when we have these big shatter bruises. So how do you go about changing that? Well, if you're operating a piece of equipment that's got the ability to lower and raise, like let's say a piler, that's a great way to reduce the drop. Same thing with anything that's got a stinger type arrangement on it, where you can raise it up underneath the other piece of equipment and reduce that drop down. That's a great way for you, as somebody that handles potato, to reduce bruise. If you can't do that, let's say you've got a piece of equipment that doesn't have any adjustment, then handling potatoes in equipment that's full of other potatoes becomes really critical. So now I've got that same 12-inch drop, but now I've got potatoes underneath it. So instead of landing onto that metal, I'm landing on those other potatoes. So I don't have near the impact. These potatoes are cushioning the fall, and so we don't get that full impact. We like to use the term, run every piece of equipment at capacity. Have it always full of potatoes, so if there is any drop, that potato is dropping onto another potato instead of hitting a hard surface. And that leads us to our final key, which is the surface that the potato falls onto is really critical. Most of the equipment that we use to handle potatoes is made out of steel. So here I have that piece of steel, and again, you can see, let me grab a new potato. You hear that sound, that loud collision, that tells us there's a lot of energy. This potato is very likely to be bruised when I drop it that far. But now let's take something soft. Here I have a piece of foam. This foam has some give to it. See how my finger goes in there? That tells me that the foam is absorbing some of the energy of the fall. So if I drop this same potato again, it absorbs some of that energy and the potato actually bounces off of there. And it's not going to absorb that full impact. And again, that's a great way to reduce bruising. Now, let's say you have a piece of equipment that doesn't have the ability for you to put some foam on there because there's too much wear or something like that. Even a piece of rubber belting that doesn't have much give, if you fold it over so it's got a loop in it, you'll notice that it's now got some give. So anything that gives and absorbs that energy will reduce the amount of impact and therefore reduce the amount of bruise. So just summarizing, the really key things you can do as somebody who handles potato to reduce bruise are watch the temperature, make sure you're handling potatoes when they're above 45 degrees. Number 2, watch the height of the drops. If there's anything you can do to reduce the height that the potatoes are falling from, do that. If you can't do that, then use some kind of soft cushioning over hard materials like foam or folded over belting. And then finally, run that equipment full of potatoes. Make sure the potatoes are falling onto other potatoes instead of hitting that hard surface.